We're into about 120 guitar lessons now. I've been doing this for about 4 months, but 120 lessons would likely take you 3 years or more. If you've been following along in Hal Leonard, we've got about half of these lessons are somewhat beyond what you would be if you were only doing the reading through there and doing appropriate kinds of scale work on top of it. But most of the auxiliary stuff that's come along the way would be the information that I would be adding even at the time that we work through Hal Leonard. Now we're going to move into book 2 in earnest. Most of the things we're going to learn early on we've covered before. The first couple of pages would give us some chords, teaching the A minor chord and some down up strums, which you've seen already. So I'm going to skip over those for now. We're going to move to page 3. This is Hal Leonard introducing the dotted note. You've seen this before. We've talked about it even since some Christmas songs, but we might as well work on the explanation of it a little bit and develop some of the counting that they give us and see where that goes. The first thing is when you dot a note, you're adding 1/2 of its value. There's a few ways to talk about this. You can say that you're multiplying that note by 1.5. So a half note is 2 beats. If you multiply that by 1.5, you get 3 beats. You can also think of it as adding to that note 1/2 of its value. So it's 2 beats, you're going to add 1 beat to it to get 3. Most musically, what you can think of is you're adding the next lowest note in terms of time value. We're very familiar with the fact that whole notes divide down into half notes, which divide down into quarter notes, which divide down into eighth notes. So a half note with a dot is the equivalent of adding a quarter note to the half note. So the dot could actually represent the next smallest note. A half note plus a quarter note is 3 beats. That comes in handy a little bit more when we get into smaller notes. A quarter note times 1.5, 1 beat times 1.5 is of course 1.5 beats, 1.5. Or you could think of the quarter note as being a quarter note plus an eighth note. Not just plus actually, I should be saying tied to an eighth note because we're extending its value from 1 beat to a beat and a half. As we get smaller, if you took an eighth note and dotted it, you're thinking of a half beat times 1.5, which is 3/4 of a beat. But what is that? That's actually an eighth note plus a 16th. It's like 3/16, and in that beat there is one remainder, another leftover 16th. I'll illustrate that a little bit more with the quarter notes. If you had 2 quarter notes, that could be the equivalent of a quarter note and a pair of eighth notes. When you dot the quarter note, you're bringing one of those eighth notes into the original quarter. So it's a quarter and an eighth. That means 2 quarter notes could be replaced by a dotted quarter note and an eighth note. This quarter, by getting a dot, has borrowed an eighth from this quarter. This is worth 2 eighth notes, 2 half beats. One of them comes over here. So we get the first note is 1.5 beat and then a remaining half beat. If you're counting this as 1 and 2 and 1 and 2 and. This is beat 1, this is beat 2. You could play 1 and 2 and 1 and 2 and. That's how this is working out. When you emphasize a lot of these ands, a lot of the upbeats instead of the downs, we call that syncopation. We're going to run into that on page 5 a little bit more. So I'm going to put up the picture for page 3 here and run through some of the exercises. The best one to work on there at first is number 7. So we'll go to that. First you would look at it and identify the notes. You have C, E, and G. Previously, you've learned that that's a C chord. Those are the thirds. C to E is a third, to G is a third above E. C, E, and G. So it goes C, E, G, E, G, C, C, E, G, and so on. However, you see your first quarter note is dotted, so that's a beat and a half, leaving us an eighth note after that. So the C is a beat and a half, 1 and 2 and. The E is an eighth note on the and of 2, 1 and 2 and. The next note is a G on beat 3, 1 and 2 and 3. You've seen this way back to Ode to Joy, but here we're getting more of an explanation of it. 1 and 2 and 3. Beat 4 is divided into 2 eighth notes, so that's 4 and on an E and a G. So we get 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and. That bar again. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and. The next bar has all the same notes, but not the same pattern. So now we get the C for, again, a dotted quarter, 1 and 2, and on the and is another C. 1 and 2 and, then an E on 3, and a G on 4. Those are quarter notes, E to G. The first two bars then, 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4. Now the next two bars are exactly as the first two. So you end up repeating the groove. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4. And let's end on a C. The next best one to work on is right above it, number 6. You have to read your ledger lines. We're down under the second ledger line. You have a maximum of 3 ledger lines. If you're under the lowest, the third, you'd have an E. An F would be on that third ledger line, so what we have is a G under the second ledger line. G is your 3rd fret note. Then it's going to go down to open E. I have a toss up here whether this is the better one to start on or number 7. This one's nice because it's only 2 notes, but it's got a lot more 8th notes, so either way, we win with both. We've got 2 Gs. Again, the first is the dotted quarter, so it gets a beat and a half. The other G is on the end of that second beat. So we get 1 and 2 and on the Gs. 1 and 2 and. 2 E's and a G and an E. Those are 8th notes, 3 and 4 and. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and. So G, G, E, E, G, E. 3rd fret, 3rd open, 3rd open. Next bar is very easy. Pair of G's and 2 E's. The squiggle on beat 4 is a rest, so we get a G on beat 1, a G on beat 2, and then the 2 E's in beat 3. They're the 8th notes, 3 and. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and G, G, E, E, rest. Second half is the same. Repeat. G, G, E, E, G, E, G, G, E, E, rest. G, G, E, E, G, E, G, G, E, E, rest. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and. Took my eye off the ball there for a second as I started to plan the next one. Number 5 on that page, the first exercise in this dotted quarter note category, is sort of a combination of number 6 and 7, which we've already done. We've got the 8th notes of number 6, we've got the low notes of number 6, we've got the chord idea of number 7. What you'll see here is you're going up a scale, G, A, B, D, E, G, but you've skipped some notes, C's and F's. That means we're in a pentatonic scale. You've certainly seen enough of that in book 1. In fact, you've heard this song many times. This is My Girl. So we've got G, A to B, to D, to E, to open G. The first G is a beat and a half. It's a dotted quarter note with the A on the 8th note. Then a stream of 8th notes, 3 and 4 and. So we get 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and. This is just repeating bar 1. Pentatonic in G major. First note is long because it's a dotted quarter. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and all the rest are 8s. The 8s are all equal, with the first one being worth 3 of them. So that's one of the tricks I want to know about having that dot. That's worth 3 8th notes. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2. There's 3 of them there. Ta ta ta. Or T T T. Back in your grade 2 days. So I'd repeat that for some time, and then I'd look at the next 2 bars and notice we're going to the C. C, D, E, G, A, C. We've seen this back in Boogie Bass, where we played a blues on the G, and then we moved that exact pentatonic onto the C. That That was back on page 37 in book 1. Now we're taking our pentatonic idea in My Girl and moving it up to the C. Long, then eighth notes. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and T, T, T. And then you'd be back to G. 2 of those and 2 of the C's. Back to the G, and so on. If you're working in your Hal Leonard pop supplement books, My Girl is one of the songs they established there. So we'll probably go to that very soon as well. I guess we might as well do the last one. We have a little chorded pattern. On example 8 of your page 3, I hope, we have orchestra slashes indicating the chords. So the A minor is the beat and a half, 1 and 2. On the 8th note, the and of the 2, we play a D chord. That'll be an up strum. They indicate that with a little V. And then that boxed in slash is a half note on a down strum. That's the staple for the D. So it's A minor, D, D. In the next bar, we do the A minor the same length. But when we get to the D, we do not only the and of 2, but we continue down, up, 3 and 4 and. And these 2 bars will repeat, so we get 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3, 4, 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3, 4, 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3, 4, 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3, 4, 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and. Notice on those 2s when I'm not playing, I'm still doing a fake strum in the air. Same thing if I hold the D for 2 beats, I'll do a fake 4th strum. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and down and fake up, down and down, down, up, down and 3 and 4. 2 and 3 and 4. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4. This song would be in A minor, so you can end on an A minor. I was going to move to the syncopation page, but that seems to have taken long enough. Let's leave that for now.